So the goal of this stream is to really walk you through the process from scratch. And I barely spent maybe a couple of hours on this so far. And a lot of designers or developers, when it comes to like a blank screen, they don't know what to do. They don't really know where to start. Should they copy something or should they start from scratch? And it's like a fine balance between the two, basically. So I'm gonna try to give my perspective. I've been designing for about 20 years, and it's hard every time. There's no silver bullet, but at least if you have some rules, if you have some idea of what you're trying to solve, it's going to be very helpful. First of all, you're gonna need a design tool. So Figma is what I'm using. And second of all, you're gonna need to know what you're designing, right? Like, I think it's important to design something real, like something that you want to solve, an app, a concept, anything could be really useful. In my case, I'm going to redesign DesignCode.io, which is the website where we're serving all the courses. The most popular course right now is SwiftUI, and we have so many pages. We have the course page itself. We have the landing pages. So this is the article page where we're serving the video, and there's a lot of things to cover. I'm gonna try to kind of give an overview first. So we have the courses page, downloads, pricing, but the way that I like to do when I design something is to not focus on the past, is also to focus on the future. So what problems are you feeling right now about your app, right? Like if you look at any design, nothing is perfect, okay? And you will never want to focus on just old techniques, because there are always new techniques that are coming out. There are always new tools, new platforms. And the idea is, how do you leverage new technologies and new workflows? And how do you use those things to make your website more exciting? And if you look at this website at the time, I think, SVG animation was kind of cool. So I wanted to give that a try. And, like parallax effects, as you can see here when I was hovering this, at the beginning was fine. We had very controlled backgrounds and titles, but eventually the problems arise from, when you have designed something from the past, but suddenly you have new content, you have new covers, and you can already see the problem. So the text is barely readable. There's too much text, and we also have problems with the navigation and how to find courses. We don't have search, we don't have bookmarks. And let's take a look at some of the features that I want for DesignCode 4. So we want to have a search. We want to have better readability. We want to have comments. We want to have certificates. So those are some of the features that we want to bring into the app. And we also want to have a fresh design that is using new techniques, new technologies. We also don't want to create landing pages every single time. It is exciting. As you can see, this is a landing page. It is exciting to have a landing page, but at the same time, it requires a lot of effort from the team to always come up with a new concept. Now, the question that we should be asking is, like, how do you make a landing page as exciting, as customized, as different, while using a system that would encourage reusability in a sense that, let's say you have the purchase card, you have like maybe an angle mockup with some preset animations. You can change the backgrounds and the UI to present that. You would have like every single landing page should have like tweets about the course. It should have the curriculum, so all these sections involved in that specific course. Someone is asking, what is this website? Well, the website is DesignCode.io. This is where we serve all the courses for SwiftUI, for React, for Figma. among 20 other courses. And the goal today is to sort of like look at a fresh perspective, and how do we come up with a new design, and how do we approach it to solve some of those issues. Okay, so yesterday I spent a couple hours on this, and basically, I want to look at readability first. So I think that's one of the main problems. So if you have a card, you want to look at how you can put the information and still make it super readable. And also, when you design an element, you want to make it reusable as well, so that it can welcome any sort of artwork. So you can see that this is an illustration from Mika, and this is from shape.so. We have like a huge library of assets. And basically the new design needs to be able to welcome that. Secondly, let's take a look at also new techniques, animation techniques, and so on and so forth. A lot of designers, I think their problem is that when they design something, they don't really think beyond the staticness of the design. They don't think about the animation. They don't think about the states, so the hover state, the press state. And I think it's really important to kind of like visualize very quickly how you want to, animate this, how you want to transition this and create those states. So, for example, one thing we can look at is, let's say we're designing it this way, and on a hover state, suddenly you would have this rectangle that could be going full screen, and you have to look at what element should be moving. So it should move like this, and maybe this can fade in from 10% to 100%. So I'm doing it statically, but eventually we're going to do it using real animations. But I think it's important when you're designing UI to think about the animation that comes with it, the state. So I just wanted to kind of explain my thinking into how and why I designed these cards. And there's just so many ways to design cards. And for example, we can look at different masking. We can move these icons in different ways. So you can put it next to the right side. We can put this to the right side, and suddenly your UI is completely different. And I just want to encourage designers to really explore from different elements of their UI, and just like play around with some of these positioning and some of these elements, and see how it can make it even more interesting, and while making sure that you're respecting the rules. Now, what are some of the rules, right? So the big question is, what are the rules in UI design? I think it's really important to know some of that. First of all, legibility, super important. So for example, if you look at this specific card, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and as I move things around, let's say you're taking this card from a template and you don't know what to do. You want to make it unique, but you're playing around with it, and you don't really know what feels right and what doesn't feel right. So let's take a look at this. First of all, the rule for me is negative spacing. It's important to have a specific spacing in mind that is consistent. So for example, here from the left, it could be 30 or it could be 20, depending on the size that you have. So in this case, if you have less space for your content or for your text, you might want either to make it bigger, like this. And depending on how much space, we can use either 20 or 30. But when you pick one of these two numbers, you can also be using a grid. For example, the 4-point grids is very useful. If you pick any of these numbers, you have to be consistent everywhere. So you can't just like put 20 from the left and then suddenly you put like 4 from the top. It looks wrong. It doesn't look symmetrical. And that's another thing that you need to look into when you do UI design is symmetry. That's sort of like the foundation of beauty. and aesthetics. So if you look here, if you set 20 from the left and you set only 4 from the top, it doesn't feel right because there's no sense of order and symmetry. And so what I would suggest is to set 20 from the top as well, and now it feels a lot better. And the same with stacking elements. So for example, if you have, let's say, the progress bar right here, again, super important to use symmetry. So if I have 20 from the left, let me just zoom in a little bit more. 20 from the left, I would have to have 20 from the right as well. So now we're at 16, so I'm gonna set 180. So 3 from the top, 3 from the bottom, 3 from the left, and now it starts to feel a lot better. And now we can sort of like think about the animation and the progress that comes with it. So, okay, so one person asking about the 4-point grid. Personally, I don't really use 4-point grids, but if you're starting out, I think it's important that you have a good foundation. So the way you would set up grid is to set the, if I'm not mistaken, I thought it was here. I think Figma might have changed since. Usually you can select outside and you have like these grid settings, or maybe you have to select the actual artboard. Okay, I'll come back to that, but there's definitely a settings for the grid in Figma. Okay, so all right, spacing, super important. 20 from the left, it has to be 20 from the right. So I'm fixing it. Same here. Okay, so 20 from top and right, 20 between each other, or 12 depending on how much space and what feels right. So that is about spacing, super important. What else? Readability. So if you have a design like this, you have the text that is suddenly on top of the illustration. You have many solutions. So for example, you can move the illustrations, which can be a bit hard to code, or you can use maybe like sort of like, how do you say, a mask. By the way, I'm using auto layout, which is why I'm going to have to move this inside. Okay, right here. So I'm gonna put this before. Okay, all right. It has to be on top. So the structure has to be, it has to make sense, right? So there are several ways to approach legibility. So you can use, let's say, a gradient mask, for example. So you can use a linear gradient, and then you use a black. You would have to switch using opacity from the top, and this the bottom one would have to have less opacity. So that's one way to do it. There's also another way to do it, which is to use background blur. And you know, speaking from back to the point of using new techniques, background blur is a new technique in iOS 7. It's been a while, but it's still really cool to use, in my opinion. So the way you would do it is you have to use the background color as solid, and you have to set a certain, you know, a transparency. So let's say I'm using 50% transparency, and I'm in Figma. I would have to set background blur to let's say 20. So now we have context of the background while making the text just a lot more readable as well. And if you're adding like this container here, it's, you know, it's important to make sure that we also have the same spacing like this. So now it's a lot better. And if you do animation in the background, so let's say if your element in the background is animated, it's going to feel very lively and vibrant. And that's kind of like what we're looking for as well. And the cool thing about background blur is that you can decide to use different color to contrast your content. So in this case, if I have, like, let's say, a black text, I would have to have a white background, and vice versa. If I have a black background, I would have to have white text. So contrast is extremely important. It's also very important to have not just one single color to make things more interesting. Just like in real life, when you look at objects in real life, most objects don't have the same amount of lighting. If everything had the same amount of lighting, you wouldn't have hierarchy. You wouldn't have the same level of importance on every single elements, which is why one easy things to do is to use a transparency. So for example, I can set this second element to 60% transparency. As long as this is readable, then this is a good way to approach this issue. So 70%, or I can use colors. So for example, if this is white, I would use a complementary color. So the color, it's important to use either from your design system or from a color picker. So you can directly, let's say, pick the color of the background of the card. And therefore, it makes your design so much more interesting just by changing the color of this element right here. And the same with, when you have a complementary color, it's also important to be consistent. So let's say if you look at this card, I have how many colors? Apart from the illustration itself, the illustration itself is outside of that realm of primary and secondary colors. But in this case, we have the yellow, we have the blue, we have the dark blue, and we can definitely utilize existing colors to complement new UIs that you import into your design. By the way, I'm trying to read the comments at the same time that I'm broadcasting. It's quite challenging. As I mentioned before, this is my first time, but I will try to do that multitasking. So, all right, so colors, yes. Be safe, don't try so many colors when you're new to this thing. You don't need to to have 15 colors. You don't need to have 5 colors. You only need to have 1 or 2 colors. And you need about 1 or 2 neutral colors. And what I mean by neutral colors, I mean like, this light blue here is neutral color. This background dark blue is neutral color. The white here is a neutral color. And, I would say 1 or 2 is good. So in this case, I'm using light blue as a neutral color, and I'm using dark blue as a neutral color. And I'm going to try to utilize this across the UI to be consistent. And it's so important. So you can see the background that I'm using here is the same background as this button here. And the blue color that I'm using here would be the same as the blue color of the illustration itself. And the white and black are usually good as a starting point for contrasting against the background. And it's good for body text, for content. And so, yeah, definitely use white and black most of the time. As you know, most UIs are comprised of, I would say, 60 to 90% typography, which is why it's important to select a good typography, a good typeface. And to be honest, I have to say we're super lucky to be in this day and age where we have so many resources out there. We have Google Fonts, we have SF symbols, we have fonts provided by Apple, by Google, like Noto or WorkSound or OpenSon, Museo. A lot of these are amazing fonts. This is not something that used to be available back like 5 or 10 years ago, and now suddenly all of these big companies are providing their fonts and they're free to use. And so I think it's important to sort of like look at all of those resources that are available to us. The one I'm using right now is called a SF Pro. I use this a lot. Why? Because I design a lot for iOS, and I design a lot for people using and browsing on a Mac. Why is that? Well, because I'm teaching, a lot of my courses are teaching to designers, and a lot of designers are using these tools as their primary driver. And also, it saves a lot of time. Not saying that Windows is not important. I think it's important, but it's just that, you know, it's still gonna look fine. It's just that the level of expectations is not the same. Especially, you know, if you look at Windows, the fonts that are available and the cost of making those fonts available, especially the custom ones, is definitely not the same for Mac and Windows. And you know, sometimes you have to pick your fight. You know, depending on how big your company is, how big your team is, you have to pick your fight. You know, I've always worked as a one-person team in most projects, I would say. I'm not saying we're not a 15% team, but we do try to spread the team in small sizes of 1 or 2 people designing for a specific product. And we try to be very lean in the way that we design things. And so when we are lean, we need to kind of like put the resources in the right things, not try to necessarily fit every single platform out there, but to make sure that one platform works really, really well, and the other ones will work well, but maybe not as perfect as it would be, let's say, on an iOS platform. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about SwiftUI, is because, you know, it focuses on iOS. It's ensuring that the people who are using iOS are going to have the best time learning the course. And so if they have the best time, then, you know, my goal is fulfilled. So yeah, that's a little FYI about resources, fonts, and all that stuff. Now let's talk about the card. So you know, I could have put these buttons here, but the problem is, if you have the content in the background, and if this goes in the way of your content, it is important to get it out of the way. So if I'm using this type of layout, I would have to move this button like this. And then using auto layout in Figma, I can switch from vertical to horizontal. And you can see I'm using a background blur, which makes these buttons a lot more interesting. And so I can just do it like this, or I can move it to the bottom so that we don't have the problem of an empty space. So that's also another problem in design, is the problem of empty space. So let's say if I were to put 3 buttons at the top, well, I have this huge chunk of empty space that I don't know what to do, and you don't necessarily want to make it feel like it's wrong. Okay, it's okay if the content, let's say, is centered. So this empty space is okay because there's this concept of symmetry that helps with that aesthetic. But if here I can have the power and the control to make sure that this empty space is not going for nothing, then I should move these buttons at the bottom like this, and it's just gonna look a lot better now. And you know, there you go. And concept of symmetry. So let's say if I'm using 24, I'm hearing my son, he's gonna come here any moment. So 24 from the left, 24 from the right. I'm sorry about this. Yes, so you can see this is what a lot of parents have to juggle with when they have to work from home. You never know when the kids are gonna come and play with you. Are you okay? All right. So yeah, as you can see, I took this card here and I made it into a completely different layout while keeping the same principles about spacing, about legibility, about font size, and, you know, symmetry and all these stuff. And so if you have these strong foundations for your design, you're gonna be able to explore any kinds of layout possible, right? And that's the goal, right? Like I want to make sure that you understand these goals. I want to make sure that you understand these goals. Okay? Okay, so how much time do we have now? Okay. We're already at 28 minutes. All right. I definitely had a few things that I want to talk about. So we've covered you know, UI design foundations. Let's talk about iOS. Okay, so let's talk about iOS. If you are not familiar with iOS or Android design, I think it's important to look at the guidelines. So you would search for iOS design, and you know, you would look at these HIG. It's a lot of reading for sure, which is why, you know, I wouldn't use the HIG as sort of like read a book the whole way through and then I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So I would definitely not to, you know, like look at it like a book and just like not design anything. I would definitely look at it sort of like a documentation. You know, like how in code you would go and whenever you need a code snippet, you're like, okay, I need a button with hover state. How do I do that? Now you go to the documentation and you're like, oh, this is the piece of code that I need to do that. Well, I want you to look at the Apple iOS guidelines kind of like the same way. So you would sort of like, okay, well, how do I make my layout adaptive? Or, you know, especially the visual design space, you know, you have adaptiveness, you have animation, branding, colors. So already you have a bunch of good starting colors for you. You have typography. So this is the beauty of this microphone. You cannot hear as much the background noise. So he can be in the background and I can still be teaching. Hopefully you guys can hear me well. So you can see, you know, we have typography, we have, you know, dark mode, you know, how we're setting the elevation, the material, the colors, the animation, the adaptivity. So this is good. Definitely look at also material design. The same way, use this as a documentation. You know, they also have really good color guides. So the color system that they have even more colors to play with. They have, because, you know, if you look at material design, it's a lot more focused on the flatness of design, right? And because it's so much more focused on the flatness of design, then suddenly the colors have become more important. Versus in iOS, there's a lot more things you can do. There's more flexibility. You have depth. You have a lot more tools to change the shadows, to change the blurriness, to change the corner radius of the cards, and all of those things can be done in iOS. Versus in Android, a lot of the apps have to look very similar, and the color is everything. And because the color is everything, color is so important in Android. It sets the branding, it sets the navigation bar, it sets the plus button, and all of these things. So, you know, if you want to design for Android, you have to have a very good understanding of colors, because it represents most of the app design. So as you can see, like this app design here, it's very stock like, you know, like you have the navigation, you know, you have the color, and then you have the secondary color, which is usually a complementary color or a something that complements well. And you know, Android gives you all of these sort of like options that you can use, and there are amazing websites like material.io, I believe, that, or is it Material Colors, where they sort of give you a tool to mix and match colors and all that stuff. There's so many resources out there, but colors is very important for Android design for sure. Now, SF symbols, super important to use if you are designing. If you are not necessarily an icon designer, which most of us designers are not, They have over 1,000 icons. The beauty of using SF symbols is that it's free, and it's basically all of the icons available in iOS, and it's going to be very consistent with existing icons and apps that are out there. And a really cool technique that I like to use with SF symbols is to simply copy and paste into a text, because it's essentially a font icon. So for example, if I want to use this icon right here, I can just copy it. So Command C and go to my design, and I can just Command V and paste the icon. And now I can just change the boldness of the font, and it just changed the complete language of my icon. By doing this, I can change the size, and it's gonna look sharp, it's gonna look amazing, and it's all translatable into SwiftUI by a single line of code. You don't need to import assets. So this makes it so easy to work with developers. And that makes the whole flow of working with developers and working with yourself as a developer, if you're building your own app, so much easier by using SF symbols. Now, if you're a designer and you want more control over your icons, what I would suggest is, there are so many icon libraries out there. So for example, there's Streamline icon, there's Font Awesome, there's UI8. There's a lot of resources. Personally, we try to, because like the way I see my workflow is that since we're building and designing a lot of icons for our apps, we want to build it ourselves and to make it available to everyone. So that's why we started Shape.so. And it's a one-time payment, and you have access to all of these icons. We keep adding more. We started with 1,000 assets, and now we have over 4,000 assets. And we're always constantly adding more, and we're not charging anything more, especially to those who already have an account. They started as an early adopter. They don't have to pay anything extra. We have a really good search. So for example, I'm searching for edit. So we have so many options, and we let you customize using preset colors that are already available. It's exportable to SVG, to PNG, to PDF even, if you're working for iOS. And on top of that, we're not only making icons available, we're also making illustrations available. So we have over 1,000 illustrations, and you can change really easily. We want to make the whole flow super easy to customize, right? And we have so many styles, all broken down into multiple elements. We have compositions of these illustrations, and we also try to make them animated. So it's kind of like an all-in-one solution that we ourselves use for our apps and our websites, that we just wanted to make it available. We started the team, and we keep working on new stuff to add to that huge library. So so that's for Shape. And there's a new tool called Blush Design by Pablo Stanley. Amazing tool. You can, there's a Figma plugin, and you can really randomize these illustrations. It's really cool. The way that we approach Shape is different. We have more customizations in terms of colors. Everything is in vector. We can export to code. We have animations. But the way that Pablo did it, I think, is tremendous. You can really randomize all of these elements, the bodies, the people, the backgrounds. It's really cool. So you can easily bring that to your app to spice it up, to bring a level of content that makes your app more interesting. And right now, I'm actually using the icons library. So let me just bring that up. Syria, who is in the audience, hopefully right now. I don't have time to check, but we're working on a huge Figma library for all of these icons, and we don't want to stop at the basics, right? Like, you know, most icon libraries, they only have one style. They have like either the outline style or the fill style. But what we try to do is to not only have that, but also to allow you to customize, let's say, the stroke width. Let me just make sure I have it selected. Maybe not from here as a component, but definitely when I'm going to be using in the design. But you can see here, we have dual color icons, and then we have dual fill color icons. And we're going to try to bring more variations. And we also have an illustration library that is coming out very soon, where you can essentially use directly from Figma. And you know, you can, let's say, change the body, change the you know, like if you want this person to have, you know, a pants instead of shorts, you can just switch that using the options in the library. And so, you know, we're going to try to have a bunch of presets. It's very customizable. It has all of the backgrounds, all of the elements, the people, women and men, avatars, character poses, hand carry, luggage, chairs, technology stuff, objects. We try to allow you to mix and match all of these things so that you can create really interesting illustrations at the end without starting from scratch, but still allow you the flexibility to change all of that stuff. Now, how do we use it, right? So I'm gonna go back to design, and you can see here I've been experimenting with some of these layout elements, such as, you know, you have, let's say, a popover, a tooltip that comes out. So let's say, you know, this would, on the web, you would have this menu. It drags everything out, but then if you minimize, then you're gonna have some sort of a hamburger menu. So maybe this logo can become a hamburger logo, and then this specific menu is gonna come in. But at the same time, we need icons. Like, icons make your design so much better. And I think a lot of designers or people who wants to get into design needs to understand, at the minimum, how to customize the available resources, such as SF symbols, such as illustrations and icons. So let's say we have this icon right here. And what we're trying to do is, let's say you're in Figma, you have the theme library. We're gonna share with you the illustrations library and the shape icon library, and you're gonna be able to enable these things. So if I disable it, you can see that it's no longer in my assets tab. But if I do enable them, I'm gonna be able to see them right here. And why is that important? Well, now you can just directly browse all of these icons or illustrations really easily from here. And then you can just drag and drop. So let's say I want to change this icon right here. I drag and drop, boom, that's it. This is my new icon, and it's fully customizable in vector. And that's it. You know, that's really what we try to make this workflow super easy, so that any designer can just use it. And the same with illustrations, right? Like if you look at this, let's say I want to use a different color. So this time it's going to be maybe purple. And, you know, I want to use a different illustration. I can just like go to instances and let's say, boom, that's it. You know, like, because it's a library, I can just switch these illustration so easily. And, you know, it allows me to see how my UI is looking when I'm making the change. And, you know, we want to make this really easy. At the end of the day, you know, when you start UI design in 2020, it's quite not as difficult as it used to be 20 years ago when I was starting in design, because we have so many resources. And I'm just naming a few here, but there are definitely a lot more, and feel free to add that to the comments. Yeah, you know, it's really cool. All right, so let's take a look at another thing. I'm pretty much covering a lot of things here. Are you guys interested in how we can start an element using auto layout. Or maybe we can just wrap it here, and then we can leave it to another session. I'm happy to take questions, by the way. Actually, maybe I should talk about I should talk about how I came up with this design specifically and how I started from scratch. Okay, so the way that I thought about this is how to find inspiration. Okay, I just want to start out with one thing that really annoys me as a designer is how negative sometimes the design community is versus visual designers. Okay, I think a lot of designers they always like speaking ill of some of these tools that we designers try really hard to come up with and sort of like, you know, help people who might not be as good or as trained in design. You know, and one of these tools is called Dribble. A lot of designers, for some reason, they just like, you know, I hate Dribble because, you know, it starts new trends. Well, I'm sorry, but trends are started everywhere, not just on Dribble. They're started on Twitter. They're started on, you know, mockups ideas, on Medium. They're started everywhere. And I don't think trends are bad. Trends are there to sort of inspire new generations of people who may not be as trained as the ones before. So, for example, 10 years ago, nobody was using Sketch, right? Everyone was using Photoshop. And then suddenly Sketch came along, and, you know, if you're very negative about these new ideas, these new trends, well, now everyone's using Sketch and it's solving a lot of problems. Well, you will never get new ideas that will come along the way to inspire both old and new designers. So that's how I see Dribble. Just like any tool, just like any technology, you can use it the right way and you can use it the wrong way. The wrong way would be just to copy someone and just to take, let's say you browse, you know, the popular page and you click on mobile design and you're like, well, I'm just going to copy 90% of it. And of course, that is wrong. And you should never do that. So for example, you like this and you're like, okay, well, I want to create a browse and I'm going to do exactly these rounds with a logo inside with a plus on the bottom. Well, you're basically copying 90% of the design already. And that's really not really helping you creatively as a designer, because at some point, someone will know. And if someone throws you this challenge, then you don't know what to do, because you don't really know why you're copying these things. You're just like doing it for the sake of copying. But what a lot of designers don't realize is that we designers, we do copy a lot, but not in the way that you think we copy. We copy by understanding, first of all, the motivation behind it. So why was it done this way? Like, what kind of UI patterns are we looking at? So for example, you know, if we're looking at a sign up, you know, UI pattern, right? So you're like, okay, I need to create a sign up page. How would I do it? Of course, you can go and then you're like, okay, well, let me start from scratch. I'm going to go right here and start a new desktop. And I'm going to start a bunch of text and, you know, a bunch of square. You know, sure, it can work. But at the same time, you might be spending hours and hours and you don't really know where you're going with this. And it feels wrong. Okay, and that's a lot of problems that a lot of designers or developers are facing. What I'm trying to suggest is, instead of doing that, let's look at UI patterns. Okay, let's look at what other people have been doing for the past 10 years, for the past 20 years, and let's see if I can adapt that to the concept that I have in my mind. So for example, I'm looking at a sign up page. Well, let's take a look at this one. Okay, so the way that if you're a copier, you're gonna look at this. Well, okay, let's do exactly like this: logo, text, background, and then illustration on the left, and then the forms on the right. But that's it. You don't really understand why you're doing this. But instead, what I'm trying to suggest is, what if we just look at from a foundation level? What if instead of saying, well, I want to copy exactly like this, I look at this as a UI pattern, right? What if I just look at this? Okay, well, this UI is interesting. So I'm going to start a background. Okay, it can be any color you want. So let's say I'm going to set, a purple color, just to be able to contrast well with the actual window. And then I'm going to start a frame. So, all right, so this is my frame. And I'm going to set the round corners. See, I'm not copying at all what they're doing. And I can be more playful. I can even diverge from the inspiration. I can be, what if I set a bigger rounded corners? What if I, what if I set a different color? And instead of setting a 20%, I think this is maybe like 30% ratio versus content. What if I set 50% ratio? So this is how I want to see designers taking inspiration, rather than saying, well, okay, so let's just copy exactly what the person has, And I think that can really help you design better apps, essentially. So to understand from a principle level rather than from a pixel level. So now I'm using a mask so that I can see the rounded corners, and and then I can just use the illustration, and I'm going to change the illustration to another one, and then I can scale it, and then I can bring a form. So again, your form can be different than mine, and I'm bringing this one because I want to kind of try to help you understand the sizes. This is another thing that I haven't talked about, which is the proportions, the size, and it's very important. It's so important. The magic number for the size. Who can tell me what is that magic number is in the comments? Anyone? The magic number is 44. And I'm going to tell you why. 44 is the magic number for the touch. And it used to not matter on the web, but things have changed a lot over the past 5 years. Nowadays, a lot of web design has become a lot more unified to mobile design. Back in the day, we used to have everything small. So fonts used to be like 12. And people were okay because we had a smaller screen. We didn't have pixel dense screens, if you will, like a 2x screen. And so because of that, when we had pixel screen, like at a resolution of 640 by 480, well, because of that small screen, then you can kind of zoom in into the pixel, and even though we have a font size of, let's say, 12 pixel, you can still read it. But nowadays, it's no longer the case. Now, what is normal is 15, 17 for body text. And guess what? It's exactly the same number for iOS design, for material design. So that is the body text for the text. And so this is why anytime that I have a text, I always set it to about 15 or 17. And anytime that I have a button or a form, anything that is interactive, I have to set it to about 30 or 44. Now, why, like 30 would be for the smaller ones, and yes, there exist smaller buttons, but at the cost of usability. But usually you wanted to set it at about 44. So even if this is a form, so let's say the form has this background, and when you tap on it, you have the drop shadow that comes out, and the background becomes white, the text change, and there's a circle with the icon in the middle. So you can see the body text is 15. I could have set it to 17. It's fine. And it has to be kind of proportional. It has to feel like there's enough spacing top and bottom for your form right here. So you can see, using the same sort of symmetry concept, I have 13 from the top, 13 from the bottom, and here from the left I have 13 as well, so to be consistent, across the board. And I set up the interaction. I have my form right here, and all that's left at this point is just to add my text. So for example, I can reuse this. Sometimes I'm just lazy to start from scratch. I just like to copy and paste, just like in code. You don't have to always like start from scratch every single time. So you have a text, and to be able to copy and paste honestly allows you to be more consistent in your design, so that you don't have to create a new CSS for every single time that you create a new text. So that's why. Okay, proportions. So proportions is sort of like, if you look at the human body, right? If the head is too big and the body is too small, it's gonna feel wrong. And also when you're gonna start walking, you're not gonna be balanced. So it's the same in UI design. You kind of have to have a title that has a certain size, so that gives you a certain visual hierarchy, so that people who are looking at this design, they're gonna look at it first and they're gonna read it first. So that's kind of like how I see it. Let me just fix this thing. I have the masking issue. Got it. And so back to the iOS guidelines. Like I said, very important to understand, those guidelines. And Apple has a really good guidelines on Sketch. It's downloadable if you have Sketch. It's fantastic. And they have in their preferences, in libraries, they have the Apple iOS UI. And why I'm saying this is because you can easily insert new screens from the Apple iOS using their templates, such as the home screen, the widgets, and to be able to analyze some of the UI, especially those set by Apple, because they have so much more, how do you say, QA, so much more, it's going through so much QA that when you get something from Apple, that it's in the final stage of design. And I think it's important to do that. Like when you look at references, it's important to look at products that have been more QA'd than others. And by QA, I mean quality assurance. They have gone through so many iterations, so many testing, so many problem solvings, that when you look at it, you can say, well, I can trust this, right? Like I can trust that this proportion feels right. And so, like, I don't know if they have an example of like a title screen, but if I go to template iPhone, I think they only have the home screens, but they definitely have controls. So for example, a table view, a slider. I want to see like the large title, search bar, home indicator, like a lot of really good stuff. Especially the nav bar and the tab bar are very important to know. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to sort of like allow you to give you a pointer as to where to look at if you want to look at good proportions out there. And sometimes good proportions is not necessarily objective. And what I mean by that is that proportions in iOS might be different from proportions in Android. Okay? It's like if you compare a baby to an adult, the proportions are different, but both feels right. So the baby has much bigger heads, but the adults have much, but both feels right. Like it's okay because the the way things are kind of balancing each other feels right. It's just like iOS and Android the same way. So Android have their own proportions and iOS have their own proportions. And so they're really good iOS GUI, I would say. Not just the ones by Apple, but like let's say iOS Design Kit, they give you a bunch of of screens started from scratch, but following exactly what Apple has. And so, this is what you see. And, you're going to have the large title. And me, I know by heart because I've been designing for iOS for a long, long time. So the large title is 34 in terms of points. And the body text is about 17 or 18 sometimes. And the small text, such as the tab bar, is about 12 or 13, sometimes 11. 11 is the absolute minimum, which makes sense for the web as well. You should never use font size less than 11, and those font size should be reserved for the footer elements, for example. And like a little forgot password link, something that is a lot more secondary for your users to look at. But as you can see, the title here, we can set anywhere between 34. For the web, I would say you can go bigger because the larger the width of the screen is, the larger the font size can be. So let's say if you were to set this on mobile, you would have to set a font size of roughly 34. But if you were to set, for desktop, this could go way to maybe 50 or even 60, and sometimes way bigger. And again, as long as you have the magic number for the body text, the title can be almost as big as you want, to be honest, as long as you manage it well. So for example, the bigger your font is, the more you're gonna have to set the spacing between the elements. So you can't just like do it like this. You have to allow more spacing between the elements. And the smaller it is, then the more you can contract those elements together. And so yeah, so that's about proportions. Any question about proportions? Okay, so since we don't have any questions, I'm going to wrap this up for today. And I think I covered pretty much all the things I wanted to talk about, at least from an overview perspective. I just want to say thank you everyone for participating. This is the first time I'm doing this. I apologize for the beginning and also for having, for being at home, and sometimes my kids, they just come here and I just don't know what to do. Hopefully this was useful. If this is useful and you wanna see me cover more topics, I'm happy to cover those things in a future stream or video. And I'm also happy to answer questions. So let's see, we have two questions here. How do you create these non-rectangle background images? So you mean these blob right here? That's super easy. So let's say I have a background. You would have a pen tool. And yeah, you just like make sure that you don't do any concave. And there you go. And one thing that you can do to sort of like make this a little bit better is to play with your mirror angle, and then you have to drag it. So when you have mirror angle, it makes things a lot more smoother for the shape, like this. And now when you have a blob like this, you can fill it. And then you can use this as your background. So you can sort of like set it like this, and then you can set another one, and then you can change the color. And voila. And after that, you can set the bend tool, which is really, really cool as well. Boom, you can see. Yeah, Figma is just awesome. You know, make it even more unique. Okay, second question. What is the difference between table headers and section headers in iOS? So a section header would have, if I understand your question correctly, a section header would have the bigger title. So it's what they call the large title. By the way, I do have an iOS design course. It's a little bit old, but it's still extremely relevant. And you know, for those who already have a subscription on DesignCode, which helps a ton for us because we can keep creating these courses for you and these streams for you. But you know, even though it's for iOS 11, iOS hasn't changed a lot in the past 3 years, to be honest. And this is extremely relevant. So you know, it explains the evolution of iOS from skeuomorphic design to flat design, and how we made the switch to large titles and bold fonts and all of these things for readability, accessibility. So, and we also have content about colors, which I think a lot of people would really appreciate. Typography, animations. This is taught by me, by the way. So, you know, if you do like this teaching style, this is definitely something you can use. And yeah, absolutely. So the section, the table headers, if I understand correctly, have smaller fonts, but if they include the large title, then they would be essentially the same. It's just that when you scroll, I think it becomes like the nav bar. So developer handoff, that is a big topic. This is something I would like to cover in a new stream. What do I use, Figma or Sketch? Right now, I'm more leaning towards Figma. And the reason why is because of the team element to it, because we have a team of about 15 people. And for us, it is very, very important to be able to give feedback very quickly. But at the end of the day, a lot of the tools are moving towards collaboration. And Figma has completely changed the landscape, just like, you know, more than 5 years ago, Sketch has completely changed the landscape of design tools. Figma is doing amazing things right now. And I can see, you know, if Syria was to jump in on the library, I would be able to see his cursor. I can give him feedback right away. I can say, well, this icon looks wrong, and maybe we can make it better. We can name it differently, and all of these things. And so, and another thing that I like about Figma is that it's actually very mature as a design tool, especially this year. Last year, I would say it was not as mature as this year, but this year we have the ability to animate. We have pretty much the plugins. We have the community now. So now they have community. So you can download these UI templates from other people, icons, libraries, and whatnot. And we also have plugins, and the plugins are freaking awesome nowadays. They just started, I think, last year, at the end of last year, and now we already have a lot of amazing plugins. The ones that I use, Lottie Files, yeah, Autoflow Vectory 3D is really cool. We have our own plugin called Angle, which allows you to do mockups presentation, Unsplash. Blush has a plugin, and yeah, there's a lot of them, and I'm sure you're gonna find a lot of great plugins in the comments as well. I'm trying to get into design from development. Any suggestion? Yes. First of all, I think it's important to practice. Just like a designer wanting to learn code, I would say get into the code right away build right away your pet project. You know, do a side project and just build it right away. The same for a developer wanting to get into code, into design. You have your code, you have your app, refactor it. You know, there's a lot of great resources. One of the courses out there is called Refactor UI, and it's really amazing because it gives you all of these action points that you can do in terms of like what can you do to make this UI better. And there are many UI patterns, and I really like the approach of UI pattern. Looking at a UI pattern, starting from the foundation, how can you make this better by refactoring existing UIs? And so this is a fantastic way to get into design. The second thing I would say is try to spend 5 to 10 hours a week and try to make this into your main workflow. So if you work for a team, talk to your manager and say, hey, I really want to try to get more into design. So for example, you can say, well, what if instead of the designer asking me instead of me asking the designer to export those assets, what if I'm the one going into Sketch and Figma and I would try to export those assets myself, customize the colors, customize the content, deal with adaptive layout. So that's how I would start in those specific order as a developer. I would just say, okay, let's start with the easy ones. Let's export the assets. Let's deal with the PDF assets, the pixel resolutions, all of these concepts that most developers already have a good understanding of. And then eventually move into more and more into design. So, and then the next thing I would say, well, what if I customize the colors? What if I customize the size? What if I take care of the adaptiveness? What if I take care of like the boring pages, like the contact us or the terms and conditions, or the things that are left front and center? Developers can definitely do that. And so that's what I would do. That's kind of like an evolution of a developer moving into design. And please don't try to just completely move away from development, because we still need developers out there. And unless, of course, you hate development, that's another story. I think it's important to keep doing the main thing that you're really good at, and eventually, and slowly progressing into UI design more and more, to a certain point that, let's say in 6 months or 1 year, you can design your own apps. You don't need to rely on the designer anymore. And you're going to be able to collaborate better with designers. Okay, so any advice for a fresh designer? Well, I think that's kind of like what I went through this entire time, which is, I would say, design as much as you can. Do 100 days of UI design. Browse, dribble, and look at the inspiration. Try to copy gradually, like at the beginning, just like someone who's starting to draw. I don't know if you ever start to draw, but the first time you draw something, you're going to copy exactly as it is. Sometimes you would even put a piece of paper on top of another one and you copy it exactly as it is. And it takes like a bunch of practice to get into the details and the right proportions and the right spacing and all of these key foundation. And that's okay. You're starting out and you're not sharing your design. Please don't share your design at the beginning, right? Like there's no rush to share your design at the beginning stage of a UI designer. Like mostly because you're probably going to copy 90% of designs that you love, that you admire. And it's fine. Do it for practice. As you progress, you're going to go more towards the foundation level. You're going to be well, let's look at UI patterns. Let's look at problem solving. Let's look at, the rules, the grids, the spacing, the proportions, the tools that you feel comfortable with. And 100% build your portfolio ASAP, and try to find a job ASAP, even if it pays very little. You don't need something that pays a lot of money, because at the end of the day, you're doing something, you're getting paid to do something you love, right? I'm not saying do it for free. I don't think anyone should do anything for free. And I really hate the idea of free. You know, like especially at DesignCode, regardless of who joins the company, nobody is a volunteer. The problem with free stuff and working for free is that the motivation is in a way, like because you're not getting paid, you don't take this as seriously as you should be. You don't have a skin in the game, and the company doesn't have a skin in the game, so they can just lay you off anytime, or you can just quit anytime. It is very, very important to have a skin in the game, to have real task. Like, one of the things that we do at DesignCode is we just tell people to do a very specific task, like making icons, for example, or doing some UI templates for shape, or for Surya, for example. Surya, by the way, started at DesignCode at 16 years old, and he's from India. And he used to get bullied a lot in school because he was practicing something that his schoolmates didn't think it was valuable. Because depending on the country that you're in, maybe your community is not as attuned to the industry. And so he decided to pursue UI design, and fast forward 1 year, he landed a job at Design Plus Code, and I was able to mentor him, and now he's doing really amazing stuff. If you look at his dribble, he has been able to take my designs, and also his own designs, and be able to do really, really cool stuff. So don't be afraid to practice, and don't be afraid to take any job or any side projects. If you're not getting paid, do it for you. If you're doing for others, make sure that you do get paid regardless of the salary, as long as you're able to stay motivated and you can have a good living out of it, right? So depending on the country that you're from, the cost of living, you have to take all of these things into consideration. If it's remote work, or if it's office work, if you have to be an employee, or if you have to do on a contract basis, all of these factors have to come into play. But do not work for free for others. You can work for free for you, but it's important to stay motivated for sure. So I think that's basically it. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for sticking around. Thank you for listening. I hope this was useful. So I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.